Welcome back to the book club. Today I'm going to be talking about The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. As most people probably are aware, this is book one of the Wheel of Time series, probably one of the most notable series in the fantasy genre. I'm about 35 years late here, but I'm only 31 years old, so I had to read this book eventually. I'm a little late, but finally finished it last night, and now I'm here to talk about it. First of all, one of the things that I think I need to talk about right away is that I really enjoyed the book. I'm going to keep reading the series. And I honestly don't know that much about the Wheel of Time, despite being pretty active on the fantasy subreddit and just sort of generally on booktube and all of that stuff. I mostly avoid Wheel of Time related things. I've seen some of the character names before, so they looked familiar. Like I'd heard the name Rand al'Thor, I'd seen it, I'd read it in people's comments on the fantasy subreddit, but I honestly don't know that much about the plot. I had no idea what to expect in this book. I don't know what to expect in future books. I sort of just know the overall, you know, Brandon Sanderson finished the series, Robert Jordan died towards the end of it, and Sanderson carried it on. I know that there's kind of a slump in the middle at some point. I don't exactly know where people say maybe Jordan started writing because it was paying big bucks and he kind of extended things further than they had to be. Um, it's pretty interesting knowing that context and reading this first book because the book ends in a nice place. There are two distinct plot threads that are hinted at are going to be followed up on. There's kind of two different angles, I think, as far as I'm able to discern right now. So I don't know if the rest of the series is going to sort of talk about those different directions or if those are just really setups for books 2 and 3, and then there's going to be more things that follow on from there. I'm kind of interested in seeing how Jordan progresses and kind of drags along the story to be 14 books. I also just recently this year finished the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, and I kind of, at the end of Gardens of the Moon, you have no idea where the series is going to go. You really don't know where the series is going to go until book 9. So I don't need to know where the end is going to be for me to keep reading and get enjoyment. As long as each installment is pretty good on its own, I'm going to be a happy camper. So I'm looking forward to reading more. I'll probably read 1 or 2 books in between every Wheel of Time book, but I would expect that over the next year, probably I'll churn through it, maybe a little more than a year. But I'm very, very much looking forward to continuing to read. Now, some thoughts more directly on what the book is about or what, how Robert Jordan writes and all of that. I think the thing that surprised me the most is that I was really able to visualize what the environments that people were in, all the different inns and taverns and the various towns that they're traveling through. I was able to visualize it all really well, which is, odd for me at least, because I'm not really a person who, when I'm reading, I like see a movie. I kind of just read what's on the page, and I think more about just like the characters and their relationships, or what's going to happen in the plot, or like what I'm thinking, or like how I'm feeling about the book. And I don't often actually visualize or think about what the area that they're in looks like. But the way that Robert Jordan writes, I'm really just able to do that without even thinking about it. He goes into detail describing the various environments and all the scenes, and I think it really just helps it, like, automatically paint a picture in your mind about what the environment looks like, where they are, and what's going on. In a way that I think is pretty unique. I've read a lot of different authors over the years, and there's not really that many where I can actually remember thinking, oh wow, I actually was able to visualize the tavern that they're in really well. That it's kind of just, I picture a generic tavern in my mind every time a tavern scene comes up, and I need to think about it. So that's kind of a unique angle, and I'm interested once the writing switches over from Jordan to Brandon Sanderson, whose writing I'm very familiar with. I've read every Sanderson adult fantasy book. I'm curious if I'm going to notice a change at all, or if Sanderson is able to emulate Robert Jordan's writing style. Because, as much as I love Brandon Sanderson, I think his world building is really good, but I don't necessarily get the um, scenic visualization to the same extent that I have so far in this book. I think one of the things I was thinking about in Stormlight Archive is the big tower that they're in. I forget the name of it, and it's kind of a spoiler if I mention more than that. But the big tower that they're in, I picture nothing but just like a stone tower with empty stone hallways, and I don't actually know what it's supposed to look like. Maybe that is what it's supposed to look like, and Brandon nailed it, but I just picture like the most basic of the most basic. The Shattered Plains to me is just like a bunch of dirt and sand with like big cracks on, creating a bunch of hexagons effectively. Maybe that's all it really is, but I'm curious if the writing style kind of translates, or if it's going to be a very obvious like, okay, now I feel like I'm reading a Sanderson book. I'm also kind of curious if the plot structure follows the Sanderson style as it goes on or not, but I've got 11 more or 10 more, I guess, Robert Jordan books before I need to worry about that. So just kind of something that I'm thinking about in the back of my mind. Now that I'm talking about plot a little bit, another thing to mention is that this book is really a slow burn, but it doesn't actually feel that way. It kind of has the traditional epic fantasy, like it's really slow to start. You kind of got to learn why the guys on the farm need to leave the farm and go to adventure. And then the path to adventuring is pretty long. And I remember, I think I was at about page 600 out of like 750 in this hardback edition before I actually learned where they're going to end the book and sort of what the plot's going to be. And then it took 150 pages or so for it to wrap up and then have some sort of, small conclusion, not really an epilogue, but kind of an epilogue, a falling action section, which was the last couple of chapters. And so like 600 pages of build up basically before you kind of learn, okay, now this is where they're going. This is where all the big action is going to take place. And then there's like a short, quick ramp up to the action. There's like one major climactic chapter in this book, and then the falling action follows. But I think the reason why the pacing actually feels not that slow, despite kind of actually being slow, is because the whole middle section of the book is, well, first of all, there are multiple like kind of mini climaxes that happen, but also it just like feels like a chase is happening, because a chase kind of is happening, but like I don't know, just chapter to chapter, you really feel like there's this urgency and this like need to move on. And I think that actually drives the book forward, even though plot wise, it kind of seems like they're bouncing town to town and not a whole lot's changing. But I think because there's this like feeling of claustrophobia or fear, it really like drives you forward and makes it feel like it's not dragging, which I think is pretty interesting. I don't know like how well it would do on a reread. I think maybe there's other angles to look at when you're rereading the series, and I know that's something people do a lot, so there must be some great appeal to it. Maybe it's all the plot threads that happen in books 11 through 14 or something that come together and you kind of see them all in book one. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but overall I thought for an epic fantasy book, especially one written in the 90s, or I think 1990 in this case, it falls into that classic like slow burn at the beginning until you kind of ramp up into the adventure. But it's not as boring as I remember. One book I always think about is Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I forget what the first book in the title, or what the first book in the series is called. But it's by Tad Williams, the series. I love the series, but I remember the first book, the first 300 pages are all just like, we need something to happen. Like, come on, Simon, or whatever the main character's name is. Like, let's get it going. I didn't feel that at all with this book. Even when you're in the small village and you're kind of learning about the backgrounds of the characters, I think it was all still very interesting. Action starts happening pretty quickly. And all that action is actually very relevant for the entirety of the book. So, again, probably sounding a bit like a broken record for people who are Wheel of Time fans or whatever. I really enjoyed my time reading this book. I'm kind of interested in the TV show. I haven't seen it yet. I've heard mixed reviews, but I looked it up to see what books the TV show covers in season 1. And I saw that it's mostly book 1, but it covers some things from book 2 and 3. So as of now, my plan is that I'm not going to touch the TV show until after book 3. I don't even know what streaming service the TV show's on. I forget. I don't know if it's Amazon or Netflix or whatever, but eventually I will check it out. But I'm not really in any rush. I haven't even watched House of the Dragon. I'm kind of behind on my fantasy TV shows. I don't watch too much TV, so I'm going to eventually be watching that as well, and I'm interested in how that compares. Watching it just after reading the books and knowing the plot really well. I'm kind of hoping for the back in the day first couple seasons of Game of Thrones vibes, where like I had just read all the books and the seasons were coming out and I knew everything that was happening and I could tell where they changed things. But I don't know if I'm gonna get the same feeling out of Wheel of Time, or if I'm just gonna be disappointed. So I guess if you have any thoughts on the book series itself, the whole Jordan to Sanderson transition, if you have any thoughts on the TV adaptation and if I should just avoid it like the plague or if it's actually pretty good, let me know in the comments below. Just, please don't spoil anything. Keep everything very vague. I honestly don't know much about, where this story is going. So I am interested in seeing where it goes. I'm sort of expecting with the Wheel of Time for there to be some time loop thing or something to, ultimately the ending is where the beginning happens or something along those lines. But I know nothing about what's going on in between. So I'm looking forward to book 2. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.